All righty, we are here live. It snuck up on us. Well, welcome everyone, and we are here streaming live with the HBCU Lounge Network for another live episode of Talks with V. So, welcome in. And this evening's show is about dating with desperation. Are you compromising your purpose for a partner? And so I know a lot of people, they hear the word desperation and they're like, feeling a little uncomfortable. And they're like, oh no, not me. I'm not desperate. I've never been desperate, all of that. And they're like, I don't even think I know anyone who's been desperate. None of my friends. So hang in there and we'll see about that. We'll see if that changes. But I knew it was an important conversation to have. This season, we're talking about women's healing. We're working on women's healing. And so this is the topic that we had to cover, right? And so I also wanted to mention, I have heard from a couple of the people who, follow that they're not able to post in the chat. And we're also not able to see you. And that is because you're not logged into your YouTube account. So when I believe when you're not logged into your YouTube account, you're not able to like or post in the chat. So make sure that you do that. You have a little time before we really get into it to go ahead and log into your YouTube and then come back in and search HBCU Lounge Network, and then it'll bring you right in. So again, thank you so much for being here. And so without further ado, I want to go ahead and introduce our guest. So our first guest, she really oh, log in. Absolutely. Well, our first guest, she really needs no introduction. She has been here with us a few times, but we'll go ahead and introduce her for those who do not know her. We have Dr. Dyona Augustin, and we are very thankful to have you back. You'll be a recurring guest therapist with us a few times this season. So we're so happy to have you, and thank you for being here once again.
Thank
And
you for having me, V. I'm so glad that I get to be here tonight with all of you guys to discuss this topic. My name is Dr. Dyona. I'm a psychologist who works out in South Florida with my sister, Dr. Joe. We have a private practice called Augustin and Augustin Psychology, and we basically created the practice because we noticed that there was a gap in our community when it came to targeting mental health and finding culturally competent services. So we wanted to open a practice to kind of target people in our community, but especially women of color. So
mm,
once again, I'm glad to be here tonight, and I'm looking forward to all of the discussion with our other panelists.
yes, 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 yes. Thank you for that and welcome. And lastly, we have Brother Jazz, Jazz Fox. I use the term brother because I have had the pleasure to get to spend some time and hear him speak on several occasions. And a good friend of mine, Lily May, she has a brand called Glambitious,
Mhm.
and they host a devotional on Clubhouse Monday through Wednesday. And Jazz is one of the wonderful, powerful moderators in that room. Every time I come in that room, I just get blessed, even when I'm not expecting it. I should expect it, but I get blessed in the way that, he just shows up in there with covering us with the word and just giving us such good insight of somewhat of a big brother or father. And I just appreciate it. And I'm just thanking you for the room and everyone else who gets to enjoy those discussions. So thank you so much for what it is that you do. And if you could let the people know a little bit more about yourself, what it is that you do, your passion and your purpose, and how long you've been involved in doing those things.
Well, once again, my name is Jazz Fox. Actually, my first name is actually Jasmine, so everybody
Mhm,
just calls me Jazz for short. So it's Jazz
mhm.
Fox, and it's always a blessing and an honor, to speak in, the Glambitious room and to really get back in terms of ministry. But I have a degree in pastoral ministries and psychology, and I'm a licensed minister, and I've been associate minister off and on since I was the age of 19. So I
Mm,
got in ministry, actually early. I was really young when I got into ministry, And what really got me, I'm also passionate, just like you, Dr. Dyona, about psychology. I love psychology, any aspect of it. I don't care if it's cognitive behavioral therapy, NLP, anything that's remotely related to psychology. I love it. It's very fascinating. And I actually got into it because of a relationship. I had this relationship and it was going south, and I was just wanting like, what was going on with the relationship? And I kind of got into psychology on an accident. It wasn't like it was on purpose, but I fell in love with it. So that's just one of my passions. And of course, my second passion, besides talking about psychology, actually my first is probably drawing. I love art, but outside of that, it's faith. I really love talking about faith, especially from a spiritual and psychological perspective. So that's what I like to do. And I'm able to, I'm always happy to be able to do that on the Glambitious Network and anywhere else that the Lord opens doors for me to do that. So I thank you for allowing me to be on here with you as well, V.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you so much. Wow. I wanted to kind of get into, welcome everyone in the audience. We're so happy to have you. We hope this show this evening is a blessing and you take a lot of good gems with you and are able to pass it on. So share the link, share, and make sure you are subscribed. Well, I wanted to go ahead and get into why we decided to cover this topic. So, um, I've talked to so many women. As everyone knows, I am very social. I meet no stranger. And so, in my time in interviewing or just talking to friends, people who I don't know, complete strangers who share their story, and also just listening to different documentaries and reading articles, things of that nature, I learned that there's a lot of women who are out there who may put their purpose, their calling, as some would say, they'll use them interchangeably, or their career, different things on the back burner for their partner to make that partner feel more comfortable or adequate. And I'm not the expert, but I personally don't think that that is the right thing to do, because if you have that purpose, that calling, or that profession that, really sets you on fire, I don't think that it is being true or honoring yourself to put those things on the back burner or completely neglect it to make your partner feel more comfortable or confident within themselves. And so, yeah, it was kind of one of those things that we definitely needed to cover. But also, in one of the rooms that I was in with Jazz, we discussed the topic of what have you been desperate for? And in that conversation, I was just like, wow, this is really a powerful discussion. The vulnerability, the level of vulnerability that was in the room. Unfortunately, they didn't save it, because people were, sharing a lot. And I was going back to look like, wait, hold on, where is it at? But I, I was able to find the notes. And he talked about just different things that you may have been desperate for throughout, your life, just in your experience. And so I believe that the two went together because of the desperation piece and then compromising. And, you compromise when you're desperate. And so I wanted to actually go over what that definition is, because just like I said a little bit earlier, we might be like, oh, no, I haven't been desperate. I don't know what that's like. But, it's real, right? And so, so that definition for desperate is feeling that you have no hope and are ready to do anything to change the bad situation you're in. So that's real, y'all. um, but with that, being said, I wanted to kind of, let the experts, talk to us about this, because if you are desperate and you're willing to do anything, then that means you're willing to compromise, your purpose, your faith, and yourself in many different ways. So I want to go ahead and just jump into that. What do you all think about the term desperate and that situation or those scenarios where women are putting their purpose in their jobs, the fact that they're going to, go to school, get a degree, and then they meet someone and they're like, oh, well, I feel uncomfortable with you making more money than me. Right. And so if you want me to, I'm not marrying a woman that she makes more money than me. I've experienced that kind of situation with a classmate. And I was like, huh, wait, what? So you're not going to use your degree? Is that what you're saying? So I would love to hear from you guys and your, perspective on this. So,
You can go first, Dr. Dyona.
Okay, sure. I mean, I think when you gave the definition of desperate, one of the things that you mentioned is having no hope. And I think that for a lot of people, when they do get to a place of desperation, it really is just a symptom of the root hopelessness. The
Mm,
minute a person starts to feel like as if they're out of options, they will grab onto anything they can,
Mm,
even if it's not necessarily the healthiest option. So I
mm,
think that when it comes to that desperation, whether it's in dating or compromising your purpose or your calling, it comes from a place of feeling like I have no other choice. If I want a partner, if I want a spouse, if I want to keep this person happy, I'm
mm,
going to have to compromise on these different variables. So a lot of times what ends up happening is we end up saying yes to everybody else and then
mm.
neglecting
mhm,
ourselves.
Ooh. Mm, mm, mm.
Mhm.
That was good. She coming in hot, y'all.
absolutely. Absolutely.
Mhm.
I agree 100% with what was shared. It makes me think about the saying, never go to the grocery store or never grocery shop while you're hungry. Why? Because
Mm,
usually your hunger is a thing that motivates your shopping experience. So you end up neglecting your budget and, of course, your grocery list because it was hunger that was actually in the driver's seat all the time. And a lot
yes.
of times that's how people live life, especially, we're talking about desperation dating, for instance.
Mhm.
Um, People will sometimes will allow their spiritual, mental, emotional deficits to be the driver of how they select a spouse or a significant other. So what happens
Mm,
is they find themselves on the losing end of a relationship situation, trying to figure out how did I get here? You got here because you was led by the hunger of maybe
mm,
your loneliness or the hunger of perhaps like your lack of intimacy or maybe abandonment issues. So you've compromised now
mm,
being in this situation because you were itching to kind of maybe feel that void of loneliness
Mhm.
or insecurity some kind of way. So now you've succumbed to that hunger. And what's interesting is a lot of times you see this kind of pattern repeat over and over and over. They'll break up, doesn't work out, and guess what, they're in the same spot again. Why?
mm,
Because you're still being consistently led by those deficits. And that's kind of the thing. You figure like, I can't do any better, so this is the best I can do. And just
Mhm.
it's just a vicious cycle that repeats over and over and over again.
mm.
Mhm.
So true. That's so true. And that grocery list thing, that is, if that ain't the truth, you be in there like, I could make this and I
Oh
could get this. And before I make this, I might need something to snack on. So I'm gonna get this. And you're
yeah.
like, why? And then with inflation going on, baby, you don't want to do that.
Mhm.
You don't want to
And
do that. You'll be broke.
I wanted to add something to what Jazz said. The analogy that you used, the going to the grocery shop hungry, it reminded me if any of you guys have ever fasted, where you
Mhm.
went without food for a period of time, whether for
Mm,
psychological, spiritual purposes, an
mhm.
exercise regimen, the first time you eat something, it tastes so
So good.
good.
You be
Mhm.
like, ooh,
And it may not be that good, but because you're hungry, it tastes amazing. So I think a lot of
absolutely.
people in dating, going back to what Jazz said, they're doing the same thing. They're coming from a place of hunger. So that first thing they latch onto, it
Mm.
feels or tastes so good, so right, so perfect, and it may not be that great.
Girl, okay, that's such a great point because first of all, two things. I've done an Atkins diet for folks who don't know what that is. It's pretty much you're eating like vegetables and meats, but you can't eat like any fruits because like no sugar, and you're not eating any breads or anything like that. And so when I got off of it and I was able to introduce fruit, I had a peach. And most of the time peaches don't even be that good. Like the flavor is great, but they don't always be like perfect, like sweet and all that stuff. And it was a cold peach. And when I bit into it, it was like all the sugar I had been missing was coming back. I was like, ooh, this peach is so good, right? Like it was dessert. And I was just like, girl, it's just because you ain't had no peach. You had no sugar at all in, the last couple months. And so that, and then to apply that, to a relationship, so many people, so many girlfriends and girls that just, take advice have shared the same thing when they go on their, I don't know, their celibacy. Let's say that they were, abstaining, right? And they haven't had anyone even touch them, right? For a year or 2 years. And so, someone comes around and they're like, oh, okay, well, I'm gonna be a little bit more open to dating. They just brush up on them. They'll be like, oh Lord, don't do that. Don't do that. Because at this point they're so hungry for, some type of touch, some affection, they've been missing it. And so, yeah, it could make you or help you make the wrong decision when it comes time, like, okay, all right, I think I've done that for enough time. And that might be like fasting from relationships for the wrong reason. So you definitely got to check yourself on that one because you'll just snatch the first thing that comes along. So thank you for those examples, y'all. I think that they apply. Well, next question I wanted to go into is why would a person put themselves in the position where they must compromise their purpose spiritually, just so spiritually or coming from a clinical perspective? Because I know you guys both have that background. So, yeah, Jazz, you still thinking about it?
I can go. I can go.
Okay,
You said
okay.
why would people want to compromise themselves? Whether it
Or
be
why would they put themselves in that, position where they would have to compromise? Because we
well,
all know it's just kind of like if you used to smoke and you have some friends who there's going to be smoking, and drinking someplace,
sure.
Like why would you go over there? Like why would you put yourself in a position where you could have to compromise?
Well, the interesting thing with desperation a lot of times is that they're depending on what the desperation is about because they can stem from different places.
Mm-hmm.
But when in regards to relationships, at least, there's a few things. So I was talking to a young lady the other day, and we were talking about like not being married by a certain age, right? So for some women, there is a desperation with that.
Yeah.
Now, what's very fascinating with this, and she made a really good point. She said it's kind of different for men versus women. Why? Well, for women, there's this thing like the biological clock is ticking, right?
Right.
Then society says that if a woman isn't married by a certain age, maybe there's something wrong with her. So when you start thinking about these kind of things, this can produce a level of anxiety and desperation in, say, like a woman.
Yeah.
But when you really think about that, though, I think about the reason why a lot of people compromise themselves or become desperate is because I think there's a void they're trying to fill. Right. And instead of really trying to trust the process, maybe trust God or trust the natural progression of dating, maybe you don't see results by the age 40 or 43. So you become desperate. Now you start saying, I'm not going to get married, doing it the normal way. I have to take matters to my own hands. And that's a very unfortunate thing because we start allowing like the biological clock, or we start allowing society's measures, or we start allowing, our search for significance or validation to be the thing that really motivates, once again, going by that hunger of validation or the hunger of lack of significance to be the thing that really spurs on our actions. So that's why some people end up, compromising themselves because they have to fill that void some kind of way.
Yeah, that's true, Lady D. It says some people aren't aware that they're desperate. Oh, absolutely. Because I would say to Jazz's point, what he's mentioning, there's a lack of security there. You're feeling insecure because of all these outside influences, and it's such a shame what is put on us as women that supposedly makes us valuable. And you don't want to ask me because I go in I'm a little bit of a rebel, so I don't really worry about those things. Of course, I desire that, marriage and having a child and stuff like that. And yes, that biological clock that's thrown out there is like, you're not getting any younger. And, you only got so many years, all these different things. But the truth is that whatever is supposed to be will be. So you getting out there rushing, anytime that I decide I'm gonna put it in my hands and be like, God, I think you need a little bit of help. I never say that, but that's obviously what I'm doing when I decide I'm gonna go out there and and do it my way. It always ain't, it's not what I want. I'd be like, ooh, this ghetto, throw it back. Like, I don't want that. Like what was I doing? But when I wait, but wait, but while I'm doing the work that I need to do, God comes in and then he blesses it. And he gives me something better than I even thought about asking. And so yeah, that part gets hard because it's so ingrained in us, as women, since we're young girls, about getting married, having kids, and like your validation being hung up on if you have a man. And the man could be raggedy, is all get out. But as long as you got a man, you somebody. And it's just like, come on now. Come on now. And that could be compromising your purpose by being with that particular person, because I personally believe that your purpose and your partner are connected. You select the wrong mate, and that could prolong or prevent you from getting to and being walking in your purpose sooner. So yeah, doctor.
So when it comes to compromising the purpose, Jazz mentioned those emotional voids. I think a lot of people go through life not knowing they have emotional voids. So it's almost like they're just reacting and responding, but they don't understand the why. So that's where, for example, having a good therapist comes in to help you to kind of unpack what is it about yourself, your upbringing, your childhood, your relationship with your parents or your siblings that makes you respond in this way. Because when it comes to your purpose, some people don't even know what their purpose is. So it makes
Right.
it easier for them to latch on to the wrong person.
Mm-hmm.
Other people know what their purpose is, but when it comes to their priorities, the biological clock ticks so loudly in the back
Mm-hmm.
of their mind, they're willing to put that on the back burner just so that they can have this thing. And I
Right.
also think it doesn't help that in our society, a lot of women are made to feel like you're not a full fledged woman until you have either gotten married, had a kid, or both. So
Right.
it's like all of these external voices are screaming and yelling at you constantly. And then
Mm-hmm.
you have to kind of figure out which voice do you listen to. And a
Right.
lot of people, they lose their voice amidst all of the noise, and then they
Mm-hmm.
end up latching on to the wrong person, or
Right.
they end up connecting with someone who, like you said, either keeps them from fulfilling their purpose or
Mm-hmm.
derails it altogether.
Yep, absolutely. And I did see a question in the comments. Thank you so much for asking your questions. It says, listen, I don't know why I'm like singing my words in there. It must be my mom in the background because she's always like, you need to sing on your show, girl. And I'm like, that's not what we're doing, you know. Maybe something a separate show for that. But she says, Lady D says, ask, and how do we differentiate desperation from desire? So,
Hmm,
who wants to? I like that question.
It's a
Thank
good
you.
question.
that's a good question.
You want to go first, Doctor? You want me to go first?
Sure, I can go first.
Okay.
I mean, I think when it comes to differentiating between desperation and desire, it all ties back to, can you live without this thing? Or
Mhm.
do you feel like this is something that is going to validate or affirm you? And
Mm.
without it, you're nothing.
Mhm.
And
Mm.
I think when it
Gosh.
comes to desire, it's normal to have a healthy desire for example, a relationship,
Mhm.
because humans are relational. If you put
Mm.
someone in like a deserted room or a deserted island for days, weeks, and months on end, it messes with the mind. We are meant to be in relation and connection to one another. But
Mhm.
if you've gotten to the point where it's like you cannot exist or you cannot function without this thing because of what your mom said or because of what church folk have said or because of, everyone else on my timeline has a spouse or has kids and I feel some kind of way that I don't. That's when, to me, it crosses the border from having a natural, healthy desire to desperation, where you're going to be more likely to do things you never would have done initially.
Mm.
Yeah, I agree. I think you hit the nail on the head. I think it really boils down to like the feeling. Like, for instance, how do you feel when you think about this particular thing? Do you feel like if you don't get it, the world's gonna come to an end? Or is it one of those things where you're excited about? Like every time you think about it, you're anticipating it. You're just, it feels great. It feels amazing. And it's one of those things you look forward to in a positive light. And I think that's a really big thing. Like if you feel, if like, I always say, what happens to you if you don't get it? Right. And based on that conclusion, probably tells you, yeah, it's either desperation or it's desire. I mean, there's a lot of things that we all desire for, but if it doesn't happen, well, it's not the end of the world. But if I'm desperate for it and I don't get it, now I develop like maybe this fatalistic type of attitude, right? Oh, I'll never find happiness. Oh, I'll never be complete. I'll never be whole. That's desperation talking.
Right.
So yeah, how do you feel about it? And going back to what you said, doctor, you know, what happens to you? What's the conclusion that your life comes to if you don't get that thing? Because I think the fatalistic attitude and the feeling of anxiety or hopelessness, attached to that desire, that really tells you if it's more of a desire or if it's more of a desperation type of thing.
It's pretty interesting because I think about when I hear that word desire, right? And I wonder sometimes if you're in a situation and maybe you've never felt desired, because now we shifted to the feeling, on the other side, not your desire, but maybe the feeling of being desired. And so I wonder if that being desired can put you in a place where you're desperate for that person because they're giving you, it's like you're on a high that you've never been on before, because people can like you all day, they can like you, they can say they love you, but something about desire, when you feel desired by a person and you feel like, ooh, like as a woman, you feel like I'm the baddest chick that ever walked, the earth, someone makes you feel like that. You being on a high like that, it's really hard to come down. When you come down, it's I'm sure it's rough, right? So could that put you in a state of desperation because now you're like chasing this high again, like, oh, I gotta have it, like this person is the only person who makes me feel that way, so now I'm chasing this person, and the whole time like they knew what they were doing, it's like manipulating you, like getting you to that point. And now don't get me wrong, they may truly desire you, but it's lust, right? And so when they get you to that point and then they're like, okay, I'm gonna take it down a little bit, you're like almost like going through withdrawals, right? And getting to that point of desperation. So when I heard that, I'm like, ooh, child. Now I know a lot of people might not admit it, but they have had that guy that was just like, oh, like they just falling apart. They just
I
falling apart.
definitely think you're onto something, V. And even the word you used, you're using substance use language. And in some cases, that's how it is for some people, especially if, let's say, as a woman, you have daddy or mommy issues, something we discussed last time, where there are these voids that have never been met. You've never been validated. You've never been affirmed.
Right.
You can have difficulty to do that for yourself because if you never get it from your parents, you start to think, I must not be worthy of it. So when
Right.
you finally get someone who gives it to you, it really is like a drug in the sense that it does activate, the neurotransmitters in your brain. You're getting that dopamine. So what
Mhm.
ends up happening is you crave it. So this person could be completely toxic, completely the wrong partner for you, but
Mhm.
because they're giving you something you've never gotten but needed, it's going to be very difficult to walk away from that. So that
Mhm.
can feed into that desperation, just like an addict will do all kinds of things to get their next hit. You may
Mhm.
find yourself doing the same thing for a relationship.
I
Oh yeah.
agree. 100%, 100%. And it kind of makes you think about confirmation bias, right? We're like,
Oh,
we're trying to confirm something we already believe. So if we
mhm,
believe that, we need to be loved, right? We need to be desired. We're going to be looking for that thing. And if that
mhm,
is your drug, if that, like you said, based on maybe you didn't get enough from mommy or daddy, or maybe your
mhm,
ex-husband or ex-boyfriend didn't give it to you and you really feel like you need it, you crave it. The
mhm,
minute somebody gives that to you, it can be addictive. Because I think at the end of the day, we all want to be loved. We all want to be appreciated. But the problem
mhm.
is if we have a large deficit, right? Or at least in our
Right.
mind, we perceive that we have a large deficit of the lack of love.
Mhm.
We're really going to
Mhm.
be going hard for it. And that's what you do have to be careful for, because it can become like a drug, right? If you really crave it and somebody gives it to you, people understand what they're doing, right? And if they
Mhm.
know that that's
Yeah.
your thing, your weakness, they could use that
Mhm.
against you. So you got to be
Oh
very wise about that.
Yep.
yeah. Get a little game, y'all. Get a little
Oh yeah, oh yeah.
be hip to it. Because, and another thing that you mentioned when you brought up, the fact with the daddy issues and mommy issues and things like that. A lot of times people get confused because they don't understand the connection to those things, the validation and getting those things and that security. Because really what it is security. And when you are secure, it's very hard to play a person who's secure. It's
Mhm.
very hard to manipulate them because they're filled, they're fulfilled and well, I would say that I don't want to say fulfilled, but I would say that they're full, right? So everything it is that they need so that they can move and operate confidently, they have that because their parents and the people, the authority figures in their life or caregivers have provided that for them. So they don't go out into the world thirsty or
Mhm.
hungry, as you mentioned earlier, Jazz. They're full, so they get to go out there and have those experiences and evaluate uh, from an emotionally sound mind, right?
Yep. Yep.
And I think that that's something that you have to consider is just like, yeah, those things have to do with these other things because you think about, okay, my parents and the way that they're raising me or me, the lack of validation, like, why would that be something that makes me come out here and be promiscuous or put up with poor treatment, And it's just like, well, they're connected. All that stuff's connected.
It
And so,
is. It is. When you
first of
think
all,
about parents, you get your first dose of love or acceptance from them,
right, right, right,
right?
right.
And I think when you have a healthy amount of love, you kind of come out to the world with this healthy or holistic outlook on how life should be. From
Mhm,
anywhere from opportunities and everything else like that. It kind of makes me think about like business. Like if
mhm,
you were doing a real estate deal, for instance, let's
Mhm.
say like you have a piece of property, it's highly valued and everybody wants it, and you're at the table with a person and they want to play games. You can get up from the table knowing that I get another offer with the
right,
property. I'm good, right?
right.
But a
Confident.
lot of people, when you don't have that outlook on life, on the opportunities, now you get desperate. Oh, they tripping. Oh, I got to do what
Yeah.
I got to take. No, and that's how a lot of people approach relationships. They don't understand that there's always opportunities out there. But if you kind of had this limited worldview, well, yeah, you're more likely to kind of settle for less because you don't understand that there's other things out that you good to go for, but you got desperate.
Mhm.
Right. That's more, I mean, and not the type that's out there like, oh, it's always something better type of thing. But there's someone that's out there more aligned and more
Yep.
made for you.
Mhm.
And to me, just seeing that for me, being able to witness, two individuals who are made for each other, just having a couple examples like that, I'm like, oh no. Since I know it exists,
Mhm.
I
Mhm.
I cannot settle. And when he used that term, I was talking to a friend of mine, and she mentioned how when most people hear, well, men hear that term settling, they automatically think finances, but when I'm thinking of settling, I think it's like being with the person who is not right for you. And I
Mhm.
think a lot of us use that term in that way. But, men and women, we're still working on how to communicate and understand what each other is saying because we
Mhm.
can say the same words, but they mean different things to us. So, but yeah, absolutely. It's just like, okay, well, I'm settling because I'm choosing to be with this person just because I want to get married or just because I want a boyfriend, I want someone to do something with on Valentine's Day, right?
Mhm.
But the person, we don't even have anything in common. Like
Mhm.
we don't even speak the same language, and for some reason you're with them. So it's just like those type of things. Like, come on, we gotta. Don't be desperate because you want to post on Instagram. Come on, y'all. So I never post on Instagram as far as like pictures with a blue thing. Because people the minute you do, they be all in your business. So who is this? It's like, calm down. Calm all the way down.
I 100% agree with that. They will be all in your business, but I also think social media, getting likes and comments, that's validating. That's
Mhm.
reinforcing. So for some people,
They
that's
need
the
it.
only source of validation and affirmation that they get. So
Yeah.
when they see, oh, that person posted their boyfriend or girlfriend or fiance and they got 100 likes or 1,000 likes, then
Hmm.
the thought process is, I could get that too if only I had this. So
Hmm.
it's like for some
Yeah.
people, social media fills a void. The only problem is social media, it's like drinking seawater. It
Mhm.
temporarily quenches your thirst, but then it just makes you thirsty.
Right. And it's damaging. Yeah,
It
absolutely.
is.
And I think it shows up in so many different ways. It's like, okay, that might not be my particular issue in the moment, but then I have this other issue that's just is toxic, right?
Mhm.
And so I think that it's very important for us to be mentioning these things because it's relatable to so many people. And
Mhm.
it's just like, you're not the only one, honey. We all out here doing something a little crazy. So it's like, get it together. You got to have somebody say, get it together. And that's me right now, y'all. Get it together. Oh my goodness. Okay. So, all right. So our next question here is, how does desperation manifest in one's life or dating life? So what does that look like?
I mean, I'd say one obvious way of knowing that you're leaning into desperation territory is when you start to find that your standards or criteria, it starts to waffle quite a bit. So
Mm-hmm.
for example, I've known some people, and a lot of my friends are Christian women. I've known some who say, this is what I'm looking for. I want a godly Christian guy who will take me and our kids to church every Sunday, blah, 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 blah. And then as they get older, they move into the 30s and the 40s, then
Mm-hmm.
they'll say, "I'll just take a guy who's breathing." My
Drastic
standards
switch.
are significantly low. If he says he's a Christian, I'll just assume that he's telling me the truth and just go from there. So I would say the standards kind of get significantly looser. That's one way to know. The other thing is honestly a lot of compromises. It's
Mm-hmm.
normal and natural in a relationship to compromise. A relationship won't work without compromise. But what are you compromising on?
Right.
I think that will reveal to you whether this is you having a healthy desire or whether you're so desperate for that person or thing, you're willing to give up a lot of you and what you stand for just to hold on to it.
Mm. Mm-mm.
I agree. I agree. I think you have to also look at like the self-talk, right? Or just even conversations. You're like, what do you talk about the most? What do you like when you're
Mm.
having conversations with your friends? What's the topic that comes out of your mouth often?
Mhm.
Or even in
Right.
your prayers, right? We're talking about a person who's a believer. Like, what do you pray about to God most often? And you find a lot of times the thing you pray about or
Challenge
the thing you
God.
talk about, that's your biggest pain point. That's the thing that's on your mind the most. And if
Right,
it's
right,
always relationships,
right.
chances are that's a sore spot in your life. And
Mm.
I think that could be a sign that there's something wrong, right?
Mm.
Mhm.
I think another sign that a person may be desperate in relationship is kind of like going back to what you said, Doctor. You talked about how like people's standards kind of
Mm.
wane, right? And
Mm.
I think it's really fascinating, especially with people who are believers, right? Women,
Mhm.
they'll say, "Well, I'm trusting God for this spouse. I'm trusting God," and then they kind of pull like an Abraham, well, like a Sarah. With Abraham, where she says, well, basically, God hasn't given us a child yet. So here, take my slave. And
Mm.
maybe that's what God, and that's a lot of times that's what people do in relationships,
Yeah.
right? They'll say they trust God for a spouse, but then they'll do something that
Mhm.
totally hijacks that entire process. So if you're self-sabotaging, it's a good chance that you're probably desperate, right?
Mhm.
You're violating the very things, the very standards that you say you hold, right? So I think that's usually, you know, a good sign. If you're self-sabotaging or violating standards that you say are really dear to you, that's probably a sign.
That's so good. Yeah, I'm hearing less and less Boaz talk, y'all. you know, how at one point in time I was just like, "Oh, wait for my Boaz." I'm like, okay, guys, all right, okay, you know.
And one more thing I wanted to add to what Jazz said, a lot of people don't recognize when they're self-sabotaging.
No.
Mhm.
That's why self-sabotaging. You don't know you're
Yes.
doing it.
Right.
Exactly. So
Yeah.
that's where sometimes it's good to have a community. And by community, I'm not talking about frenemies, people who say they're your friends but would stab you in the back as soon as they got a chance. I'm talking about real inner circle friends who can point out to you, you know, you're saying you want this, but you're acting in X way that contradicts or works against that. So good friends can do that, and then also a good therapist can do that.
Ended once Boaz, but ended up with Bozo. Yes. Well, from my that's hilarious. From my research, I did look up a little bit of like, 7 signs you're a desperate dater. This was found on eharmony.com, I guess, which is the most credible dating site and with tips. So, all right. So 7 signs you are a desperate dater. So first says desperate daters are always available. All right. Okay. Desperate daters are clingy. Okay. Desperate daters need constant relationship status updates. This is probably, I feel like that's really noticeable. When you're constantly like, okay, so what are we now? What are we now? Desperate daters fish for compliments. Desperate daters drop their friends. And I think as ladies, we all know we have your girlfriend, and every time she gets in some relationship or there's some guy that she just met, you don't see her. She's just like, oh, I know I said we were going to go do this, but I got a date. And it's just like, okay, all right. All right, girl. We'll remember that. Pray for them. Right. Okay. And then desperate daters drop their standards. I think you guys mentioned that. And the last one is desperate daters rationalize bad treatment. And that I think that is really a dangerous one, as some of the others. But that is, you come into a bad point when you start rationalizing bad behavior and bad treatment. So for everyone who thought that they didn't know anyone desperate and they never been desperate, hopefully you're reevaluating that about now.
That list was very comprehensive, and I think it's kind of funny. The first few things on the list, it describes someone who has an anxious attachment style. Once again, that goes back to your upbringing.
Right.
So when you notice that the person is overly clingy, they're needy, they constantly need reassurance, they constantly need compliments, that is an anxious attachment style. And the problem with that particular style is you tend to push people away because you're so busy trying to get something out of this person that they gradually distance themselves. And then once they do that, it confirms in your mind, I'm not good enough, I'm inadequate, I'm unworthy. And then it becomes this vicious cycle.
Right.
So if you don't, for example, see a therapist who can explain to you how you develop that attachment style and how it plays out in your relationships, you're going to be a hamster on a wheel where you keep exhibiting the same pattern and you don't know what to do to break the cycle.
Such a good point. And it made me think of when you were talking about those attachment styles. Next episode, we will be talking about frenemies, right? And so I was going to say that this manifests in your relationship with your girlfriends. I know some of us can relate. You have that friend that is, very attached, very clingy to you. And even sometimes I've had a couple in my life, throughout that were kind of possessive, like, no, you're my friend. Like they don't want to share you with other people. And it's just like, girl, we don't go together. You know that, right? Like, you're not my boo. Not that kind of boo, but That happens, y'all. So it may be, from, some of that you mentioned is that attachment style and that desperation, like be my friend, like, always hang out with me, like, like I don't ever want you to, find another friend that you think is better because of those insecurities
Yep.
that, of not being validated, when you're young, maybe by your mother, and so yeah. But Jazz, did you have anything that you want to add to that about that list that we gave?
uh, what I thought was really interesting about that list, 'cause I agree it's a very comprehensive list,
Mhm.
is that it is interesting to me how many people, when they fall into the desperation type of category in regards to dating, it's really amazing to me how many people are afraid to
Mm.
be alone,
Oh
or
yeah.
afraid to feel like that they're not going to get anybody. And it just goes back to how important it is to really understand that you have to have a relationship with you, right?
Mm.
You have,
Yeah,
it's okay to be alone. It's okay to fall in love with you. And a
absolutely.
lot of times, going back to what you said earlier, V, about how society kind of has all these standards for women. If you're not married by a certain age, don't have kids by a certain age, there's something wrong with you. No, maybe you just love you. Maybe you love working on your career. Maybe you love, just being single in your moment. That's okay.
Hmm. Yeah.
And I think that we do really have to really start having these conversations with ourselves, like, like, how is it I feel about me?
Mhm.
And if I am single, if I don't get married before I'm 45 years old, is that okay?
Mhm.
Right.
Mhm.
And I think a lot of people, not enough people are having those type of conversations. So, they just fall for the okey doke and they'll just go for it bozo instead of waiting on Boaz.
Right, right. Desperation creating. What are these? Desperation creating these what son? Oh yeah, these son husband. Absolutely, absolutely. Ain't nobody got time for that, And you do figure those things out, like you got to pay attention and do those check-ins with yourself and see what's going on, along the way. I found sometimes some of those people that you're attracted to physically, they don't match up. I always say that they don't match up mentally what it is that you desire. And some guys, I was thinking I like them, but I really found like, no, I like myself. And they were like soundboards, and so they're
Mhm.
like repeating back what I say. I'm like, oh, okay, you get it. We're here. We like, this is so crazy. We have so much in common. It's like, no. No, he's just repeating back to you what you said. He's fascinated with you. And so yeah, I learned. I'm like, okay, no, that's this is not what I want. I want you to have an opinion. I want you to be, a strong person that I can actually admire, your perspective. And so you have to do those check-ins and make sure, that someone's not what is it called, love bombing you, and everything sounds so good. What they say, if it sounds too good to be true, most likely it is.
It is. Mhm.
I found out that is true, y'all.
One thing I wanted to kind of piggyback off of the discussion on not being afraid to be lonely or
Mhm.
alone.
Mhm.
I think for a lot of people, they think it just stops with, I don't want to be alone. But in therapy, I'll actually challenge my clients and ask them, what's so bad about being alone? And they
Right.
always look
Nice,
at me like
nice.
I'm crazy because they're like, who wants to be alone? And I'm like, I know, but I want to know, why does that matter to you?
Right.
What does it represent to you to be alone? And a lot of times it's tied back to negative core beliefs they have about themselves. If
Mm.
I am alone, that means I'm unlovable. If I don't have
Mm.
a spouse, that means I'm unworthy. If no one will propose to me, that means I'm inadequate or not good enough.
Mhm.
Once they dismantle those negative core beliefs, it helps them to become more open to enjoying themselves. And like
Right.
I said, having a relationship with yourself. But if
Mhm.
you convince yourself, if I'm by myself, that means I'm unlovable, unworthy, inadequate, and not good enough, you're not going to want to spend time with you because you're miserable company.
Right.
So there
Right.
has to be something that is changed in the mentality or the mindset to help you to recognize you not being in a relationship has nothing to do with your worth, your adequacy, your
Mm.
being good enough, or your being lovable.
Absolutely. And it's really amazing how um that loneliness, when you're so focused on who it's coming from, that companionship and that, you know, that what is it, fellowship and different things like that, you'll really deprive yourself of that same thing that could come from someone else. And it's just so interesting because if you do that, like you could be like hanging out with maybe like some of your church members or some of your friends, family members, and then you won't feel so lonely and deprived, of company. And at one point in time, I kind of was feeling like, gosh, I feel like I don't have enough love in my life, right? And I was really feeling sad about that. And then I was just like, well, no, like I have my family friends, that are out here, and I spend time with them and I feel good, about that. But also I go to a really like amazing church that like there's a lot of people who are like my kind of energy. They're like really loving and upbeat. And so I was just like, let me go get my high from church. Not that I'm just using it, completely, but like I feel good, Not only am I getting a good word that applies and is going to able, to help me throughout life, but I also am with people who are like me, And I think a lot of the times we get fixated on those things because of what society tells you. So you're so focused on the relationship, this romantic relationship, right? And you're missing out on all these other relationships, these friendships, these relationships, spending more time with your family and your loved ones, because life is short. And we're finding that out in the last couple of years has really, really proved that, of how important it is to spend time with your family, talk to your family, create those memories, because you could look up and they could be gone, and you're missing out on those things. So if you're so fixated on this relationship, you could be basically helping yourself feel more lonely and more deprived and more insecure and more inadequate because you're rejecting all these other relationships that can help fill you up. So.
I agree. I wonder though, as you ladies were talking, it makes me wonder how different a person perceives loneliness if they're an extrovert versus an introvert. Now I'm an introvert. So in regards to like relationships, I mean, I like I'm an introvert, so I like being alone anyway. So
Yeah.
I never really thought about the whole, because I was single for 7 years before I met my wife. So for me, I never really thought about, I'm single, I'll never get married. No, I was like, look, I like being alone. I just want to have a companion. I mean,
Right.
I never associated my singleness or my aloneness, so to speak, with a lack of love. Right now, I wonder now if you're more extroverted and you're single, like how much does that play a role into the loneliness factor as well? Or does it play a role?
Well, and that's so funny that you say that because I was thinking it would be maybe the opposite because like I'm an extrovert, but I think the reason that sometimes that plays a part really is because of what they say to women, right? But with me being an extrovert, I'm going to find fun and companionship with anybody, like, I mean, not like, physical companionship like that, but like with anybody, because I could sit down somewhere and just strike up a conversation and if it's good, it's good. I feel full, like, well, I recall, go back to this. I was supposed to go on a date with this guy and, it was like, it was cute and all that good stuff. But I had went to church and it was the church that I go to now, but it was my first time going there or my second time. I think it was my second time going there. And the word was like so good. It was on fire. And I had met this young lady and her mom. They were like standing outside with me. And so we walked and we sat together. And then after church, we were talking, we were just hitting it off. And they were like, you know what? We want to take you to lunch, right? And so I'm like, okay. So I go with them to lunch. I had a date later on that night. I go with them to lunch and we're so full off the word. And then we had this good conversation, good food. And it was just like Christmas. Like it was just really great, like a great time. After that, I was just like, I don't want to go out, like, on a date. Like I feel very full today. Like I don't need anything else. This was a great day. Like I'm good. And I was just like, that's so interesting because, I love love, but in that moment, I was just like, I felt full of it. Like I didn't need anything extra, that day. I was just on that high from that great experience and then the word and all that good stuff. So I don't know. What do you think, doctor? Because you're the doctor.
I mean, I definitely think your personality style can play a role in it. I'm definitely introverted. I can be alone for hours and not have a problem. I do think, though, at least for me, I can't speak for everybody else, there is a distinction in my mind between needing solitude, which is something that I like,
Mhm.
versus not being in a relationship. So I can
Mm.
definitely be alone for long periods of time with a book and I'm good. I don't need anything else. But then there's also that need for companionship where sometimes you're kind of like, well, dang,
Mhm.
everybody else is booed up and you're the only one who isn't.
Yeah.
So that's where I think the longing comes from. I was going to say desire, but it's more of a longing where
Mhm.
it's like I can enjoy this solitary time. I can enjoy being by myself, but then there's also that I wish that this was something that I had access to versus it's just not something that I have access to.
Yeah, that's a good point. Makes me think too about like if you come from a big family or a small family, like
Mm.
all those things. Like, if you're an introvert and then you come from a big family and you might be like extra annoyed, like, all these people. Like, I can't wait to
Mhm.
get grown so I can just be by myself. And eventually I'll get a partner because with the
Yeah.
partner might come more of these people, right? And so that's interesting. I think that's worth studying,
Mhm.
researching. Well, we're coming to our last question, y'all. And very important question. And that is, how can you get set free from being, from desperation? I like to say from being a desperado.
That's a great question.
Help.
I think part of being set free from desperation is actually knowing and or acknowledging that you're desperate. I can't remember if it was Harriet Tubman or someone else who said
Okay.
something along the lines of, I freed quite a few slaves and I would have freed a few more if they knew they were enslaved. I
Mm,
think it's the same thing with desperation.
that's so.
I'm the type of person, if I'm close friends with someone, if I notice something, I will bring it up. But there are certain people who are so in denial. They are not willing to listen. They
Yeah.
do not want to be challenged. They want a yes man friend. I'm not a
Hmm.
yes man friend.
That's
So I'll
true.
point things out. And sometimes, the person just doesn't want to accept or even reflect on whether there may be some desperation there. And then I
Right.
also welcome my friends to tell me if they think something that I've said or done might suggest that I'm getting desperate in that area. So I
Right.
think the first step is to acknowledge that that's there. And
Mm,
then going back to what Jazz said, asking those questions. If I don't get this, what does that mean for me? Is it the
mm,
end of the world if I never get married, if I never have kids, if I'm not in a relationship? If so, what can I do to work on that, unpack that so that I
mm,
can get to a place where I can accept myself in whatever season I find myself in?
mm.
Yeah, I would
Preach,
agree.
girl.
I agree. I agree. We had a devotional in the Glam Business Room. It was called, I think, Facts versus Faith,
Mhm.
and I was talking about how there's plenty of facts in life, right? But
Mhm.
the facts usually isn't what bothers people. It's usually the conclusion that we give those facts.
Mhm.
And in regards to this conversation, there's a lot of ladies, who are single. There's a lot of ladies who are, nearly 40 or whatever, still single, no children, and that's a
Yeah.
fact, right? The
Mhm.
fact is their biological clock is ticking. The fact is they're single.
Mhm.
And the thing is, I would challenge people is to, okay, you acknowledge those facts, we got it.
Mhm.
What do those facts mean to you, right?
Mm.
And what conclusion do those facts bring you to? And I
Mhm.
think like when you can really kind of like look at that conclusion, going back to what you said, doctor, I think you got to start asking those questions. Okay, well, why do I conclude this? And how
Mm.
does this conclusion make me feel? Okay, then what is the root cause of this conclusion? And I think like when we can start trying like tracing these things back, whether it's tracing it back to our childhood, and maybe we can't trace it back. And if that's the case, then maybe it's time to maybe get a therapist
Yeah.
or at the very least, get an accountability partner or family where you could allow them to kind of speak into your life, but you got to figure out, why do you draw the conclusions that you do? Because that's the thing I think that really drives us crazy. There's nothing wrong with being single at 38 years old. There's nothing wrong with being 40 years old and no children yet. Nothing wrong with that. Right. But if you're drawing a negative conclusion because of those facts, I think that's something that has to be investigated, whether you do it with a pencil and paper and you really investigate your thoughts and your feelings and and you kind of draw a logical conclusion to what that means, or whether you have to do that with a therapist. But I think that you really have to get down to why those facts of being single and maybe childless or maybe just a single mother, why those things really bother you, and really investigate those things.
Right. Absolutely. That was really good, both of you. And it makes you think about like, well, are you doing everything once you get that list and go through all that? Like, what could you do? Like if it's something like, well, you're like, I want to have a child and I just haven't met the person yet, this and that. Well, if you're in the financially, in a position where you could, freeze your eggs, do it, because that's going to take all the stress off. You're free. I always think about that. I'm like, for my friends who are like, well, they had kids, young, and now they're in a situation where they're single, like raise their kids. The thing to me, I feel like they have a better opportunity to really be with the person that they actually love and they wanted to be with, because they don't have that thing like, oh, I'm going to be too old to have kids. Like they already got their kids out the way. So now they can actually be with the person without all that extra pressure to have children. They can just pick someone that they actually want to spend the rest of their life with and go from there. And so there's just all those different things. And so I love what you both said. Very, very, very important. I love the steps. I always call Dr. Dyona. I'm like, she's full with the bullet points. Okay. She's going to give you the practical way for some resolution. Okay. Like it's like this. Okay. Oh, I love it. I love it. I love it. Well, that is the show. It wraps it up. Thank you so much. The both of you guys are awesome. I love this. I think that this show is just amazing. And I'm going to send it to a couple of people who I feel might, need to hear it, so they understand like, oh, okay, there is a way out. Right? There is a way to get to that better life, that we all deserve. So thank you so much for being here on this Sunday evening, and for the families who let us, borrow you, please tell them thank you. And I want to give you guys a chance to just let people know where they can find you if they want to get in contact with you, follow you, hear you speak, Jazz and Clubhouse. Dyona, you're on Clubhouse, dropping gems, as well. And then your practice. So if you could just, Dr. Dyona, I'll let you go first. Let us know where the people can find you. And
so they can find me on my website. I have my personal blog, that's drdyona.com. And then I have my private practice, which is augustinspsychology.com. And then I'm also on Instagram and Twitter at Dr. Dyona. And then my sister and I are on Instagram at the Mental Health Sistas. That's SISTAS.
Yes. All right. And Jazz.
And you can find me mainly on Clubhouse at Jassmen Fox on Clubhouse. I'm usually in the Glambitious room or sometimes submitted to serve. But yeah, I love the Clubhouse platform. I love, talking about faith and spiritual and psychological aspects of how we grow in faith and become more holistic beings and in our pursuit of growing closer to God.
Awesome. Well, again, thank you guys so much for being here this evening. And I hope you guys have an amazing holiday. We got a couple of them back to back. And so hopefully don't get too crazy this holiday. And for our audience, thank you so much for being here with us this evening. And we will be back in 2 weeks for Talks with V. The topic will be frenemies, and Dr. Dyona will be back with us again. So make sure that you guys put that on your calendar. And if you haven't subscribed yet, subscribe and click that bell so you never miss another live show. All right. Well, have a good night.
Bye.
Good night, everyone.